What is the true nature of the universe?
Hola, ¿qué tal? Mi nombre es Andrés García y el día de hoy les vengo a presentar este proyecto llamado Multiversity, un programa de entrevistas de cultura pop, donde hablaremos, o mejor dicho, visitaremos otros universos que existen a la par de este universo de la cultura popular que a nosotros nos gusta, de los cómics, del anime, de la ciencia ficción, la fantasía y todo lo que envuelve a la cultura popular. Pero en este programa lo que haremos será visitar los universos que están a un lado. ¿Quiénes son esas personas que viven en este universo de la cultura pop? ¿Qué hacen? ¿A qué se dedican? ¿Cuáles son sus pasiones? Y sobre todo conocer un poquito más de lo que los ha motivado a ser parte de este mundo de la cultura pop. El día de hoy vamos a tener una entrevista con una persona que es el mayor coleccionista de cómics en el mundo. Esta persona tiene miles de cómics. No les quiero decir cuántos porque quiero que lo vean en la entrevista. Pero déjenme decirles que él tiene el récord mundial, el récord Guiness, de la colección más grande de cómics. Esta entrevista se llevó a cabo el año pasado, por eso vamos a hablar un poco acerca de cosas que ya pasaron. Por ejemplo, él menciona que va a salir la película de Shang-Chi. Si ustedes pues, ya la vieron, es porque ya salió. Pero esta entrevista la guardamos un poquito porque queríamos guardarla para, valga la redundancia, para un momento especial. Y como no encontramos un momento especial, pues vamos a hacer de este día un momento especial. Así que sin más, los dejamos con esta, nuestra primera entrevista de este programa que se llama Multiversity. Vamos con ella.
Okay, so I'm going to start in Spanish because the people
no
be
problem.
introduced in Spanish. Ok, buenas tardes chicos, estamos en una entrevista más en esta que es Conociendo a los Coleccionistas y el día de hoy tenemos a un invitado muy especial directamente de los Estados Unidos. Él es nuestro amigo Bob Bretall y él nos va a platicar un poquito acerca de lo que es coleccionar cómics. Entonces vamos a hacer la entrevista en inglés. So, hello Bob, how are you?
Hola, gracias por invitarme a tu programa.
Excellent Spanish.
The rest in English.
¿No todo en español? All in Spanish?
Poquito español.
Muy bien. Okay, Bob, can you give us a brief introduction of you? Who are you and what is the big issue with you? What are you doing?
Well, you know, I started reading comics. I'd read them when I was little because I have two older brothers who are much older than I am. They're like 9 and 10 years older than I am. And so I read some issues of like, you know, Uncle Scrooge and Batman and, you know, things like that. And when I was 8, my brother was tired of me reading his comics. So he gave me like a little coupon that I could buy my own comics. And if I bought the comics at the local shop and brought them to him, he'd mark off a spot on this coupon so that he'd give me the money back. They were 15 cents then. So so the first comic I went and remember buying for myself was Amazing Spider-Man number 88. It was Spider-Man fighting the arms of Dr. Octopus.
It's the same comic you showed me before, right?
Yeah, I actually I bought a Spanish version of it. I got to show you, but that's the Spanish reprint of that issue, El Sorprendente Hombre Araña, I guess.
Yes.
Was the Spanish version of the Amazing Spider-Man. So I had got that one, and then I loved it, and it kind of left off on a cliffhanger. So I came back the next month, and I bought the next issue, number 89, and I started buying Spider-Man every month. So I was buying Spider-Man every month from that, and then eventually, you know, like the crossover stuff works because, you know, I like bought an issue of Captain America that had Spider-Man guest starring in it. And then I'd start getting, this was when Marvel Team Up was coming out and it was Spider-Man teaming up with someone. And so I'd get that. And then I started getting Avengers and, you know, so I started getting all the different Marvel books. So that first one came out in 1970. So I was 8 in 1970. And then probably by about 71, late 71, 1972, I started buying almost all the Marvel books.
Wow.
So I've been buying and reading comics. And that's what I like about what you're telling me about your listeners and the fans there, is that they're people who like the stories and like the characters, which is what I've always liked about comics, is that it's not just, I don't look at them as stocks, or something that like I just put in a plastic slab and, keep in someplace so that it's going to be worth money. It's like, well, if they're worth money, that's great, but I buy them because I like to read the stories. And then over time, I think in about 1976, I started getting DC Comics.
Okay.
My entry there, because I was reading Conan the Barbarian. I liked Conan a lot, and then I started reading Savage Sword of Conan, which was a little sexier. It was a black and white magazine, but you had all these great Philippine artists in that, and they, drew very sexy girls, and I was like, by this time, probably about 12 or 13, and I was really enjoying that, so I would read the Savage Sword of Conan, and then I went from that into the Warlord at DC, who was kind of a, I don't know if you've ever seen the Warlord, but he was a kind of a barbarian, but he was a Air Force pilot that somehow got into the Hollow Earth, kind of like the Pellucidar from the Edgar Rice Burroughs Tarzan stories. But it was like a barbarian world. But since he was an American Air Force pilot, he had this Magnum pistol, and so he had a sword, but he also had this pistol that he would like shoot people with every now and again, kind of like in an Indiana Jones movie where the guy has the big sword and he pulls out the gun and just shoots him. So that was fun. And then since I liked Mike Grell, who was the creator of that, then Mike Grell at that time had just started doing Green Lantern, Green Arrow. So then I started reading Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and Mike Grell was also doing Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, so I started reading that. And then it was just ultimately then I started reading most of the superhero stuff.
Wow. So it's a big duty to read all of that every month.
Well, there weren't as many comics back then. I mean, there were a decent number, but like now there's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comics every month. But Marvel and DC both put out superhero books. But at the time, in the late 1970s, Marvel put out comics that were not superhero comics, they started doing the supernatural comics and some of the other ones. So I really liked the Tomb of Dracula by Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan, and I liked the Werewolf by Night, which, since I liked that, I got the first appearance of Moon Knight, who was in an issue of Werewolf by Night.
Yeah.
And the Son of Satan, which they could never put into a comic now with the way the religion is in the United States, and but they had the Son of Satan, they had all these different things. And then they also had the Master of Kung Fu, who's actually getting a movie. It actually would probably be out now if it wasn't for COVID, but they made the Shang-Chi movie. And so I loved Master of Kung Fu. So I was loving all these non-superhero books. And then in some of the Marvel books that were not, like, they had a book called Astonishing Tales, and that had, at one point it switched and it had Deathlock, who they brought back, and he's been in things like, if you ever watched the S.H.I.E.L.D. show, they had a version of Deathlock in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. show. They had the War of the Worlds with Killraven in Amazing Adventures. And I really liked that too, and that was another one that it was kind of like, the Martians took over Earth and it was in the future, but you had these resistance fighters who had swords and stuff, and they'd fight the Martians and have adventures. So I was really liking, and then of course I liked Conan, like I said. So I just liked the stories and characters, but I started liking things that weren't just superheroes. I still like the superheroes, but I like things other than superheroes too. So at the time, these independent comic companies were starting up. So I started reading ElfQuest because I liked fantasy. So I was reading ElfQuest. since it was sort of a parody of Conan at first, I started reading Cerebus, the Aardvark, and I read that for like the whole, like the first issue of that I bought was like 16, but then I got the back issues of it. And, you know, so I read all of the issues of Cerebus till it ended at issue 300.
Wow.
And then a lot of these other comic companies started up. So Comico started up, and First Comics, Pacific Comics, and, you know, Eclipse and Dark Horse started around that time. So I started reading all these things. So like I had liked Mike Grell, as you recall, from doing the Warlord and all that. Well, he started doing these books at these other companies. So he did a book called Star Slayer that was kind of a pirates in space with swords and stuff that was really cool. And then he did a mercenary called John Sable Freelance. So I was reading that. I was reading Tim Truman and John Ostrander did a book called Grimjack. You know, so I started reading all these independent books in the 90s,